Hi, well, welcome to today's Coffee and Connection.
Good morning.
Good
How are you?
morning.
I'm ready to connect and have
I'm
some
ready for
more
coffee.
It's not the only coffee I've had this morning, Eric. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, you tend to wake up really, really early.
Yeah, the alarm is set for 4:30.
Why? Why do you do that to yourself?
But I'm usually awake at about 4:15, 4:20. So by 4:30, I'm actually ready to get out of bed. Why? Honestly, a number of things. Number one, I am naturally like more wired in the morning.
Yeah.
But with a 2-year-old around all the time and a 44-year-old around all the time and trying to navigate like work and all the rest of it, it's helpful. Honestly, it's just a little bit more, I don't know, trying to get everything done, I guess. And it gives me some time. Honestly, I spend about 45 to 55 minutes of it walking my dog, who's like 14 and a half years old.
That's awesome.
And
Love
doing
Noah.
some meditations, and sometimes I'll write emails to my stepdaughter who's deployed right now, and send some Marco Polo messages to some of my friends. So it's kind of fun. It's a little bit of me time, but then it does give me like a solid hour and a half to just crank out work, solo, quiet environment, like just stay focused. So there's some functional and then some personal reasons. The problem though is that I go to bed at like 8:45. so evening time isn't exactly like party time in the Lance household right now, or ever for that.
It's funny because I want to make fun of you for waking up that early, but then you tell me what you do. I'm like, oh, what am I doing with my life?
Oh man. Well, I mean, it's just a challenge you navigate, and it's when we connected before we started the recording for this, I was like, I need a minute, and like kind of had a little bit of a breakdown and needed that space. And there's a lot of competing demands right now, and that's one of the things I toy with. But the challenge that it creates is it does mess with my sleep sometimes. It's hard to get enough rest. So there's a balance to be had there. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. How are you? Sleeping in until like 6? You're up early. Don't act like you're not.
So it's interesting. So as you cannot tell because of the virtual background, I'm here at the new house, and the reason that I'm here, we haven't actually fully moved in yet, but I'm a part of the Maine state of Maine HR convention, and I was one of the keynote speakers, and so they're doing the entire conference virtually. So I'm obviously not in Maine because we can't fly right now, but I recorded the keynote in advance, and they broadcast it to the virtual conference. They had like 900 people online, which is crazy. And I got to be in the kind of the chat with the audience watching it. And so it started at 8 a.m. East Coast time. So I had to be up and fully functional active by 5, which means I had to wake up at Nikki hours.
Yeah, you could have called me.
And so I came here and I kind of slept on the air mattress here so that I could be up and be loud and interactive without waking up the family and the kids and everything like that. So that's what's going on, and why I was just so perplexed that anyone would intentionally wake up at that hour.
That's hilarious. Did you see my chalk note we left you on your
That's what I was just about to say. I was just about to talk about. So I've been practicing my daily delights. And so because I'm staying here, I drove here last night with a load of stuff for the house. And I pull in, and there's this beautiful chalk note. And I'll find a way to integrate this into the replay of this. But there's like a 6-panel concrete chalk art note that says, "We love the Baileys, love Team Lance." And there's flowers, and Emerson says hi, and it was like the sweetest thing, because I was struggling to back up the trailer into the garage because I need to park the trailer in the garage, and usually I just unhook it and just kind of move it, like kind of brute force, but it's fully loaded, and then the thing weighs like 1,000 pounds, and so can't push that quite up the hill to get into the garage. So I had to like back and forth. And so it was really, really frustrating. And I get out of the car and I see the note. I'm like, oh,
awesome.
It was so sweet. So that was my daily delight, and that was absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much for doing that and taking
Yeah.
the time. I don't know how long it took you to draw those flowers and everything. It was
Not very. I mean, that's the extent of my creative artwork there. So whenever anybody does actually see the photo, that's literally as good as it gets from me. Um, no, but it's funny because that, speaking of this week, and the topic of compassion and kind of how do we find ways to have compassion for other people, for ourselves. One of the practices that I've started is actually sending notes to people in the mail again. And it came from somebody sent me an early Mother's Day card, like one of my former coworkers, and it had like a radical impact on my day. And she just said, I wish you a happy Mother's Day, and thanks for being who you are, whatever, platitudes, nice things that were really meaningful for me. And so I've started incorporating that, not just because it's going to help other people, but it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And it's another way of staying connected. And when we were talking about what we wanted to explore and have coffee and connect over this week, this idea of compassion right now, as I'm working with groups, as we're talking to organizations, we're talking to individuals, this just keeps like pinging in the back of my brain as something that leaders, but more importantly, human beings need to be talking about right now, and really having it on the forefront of their mind as we're going through our days.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one thing that it does, at least because I know you so well, is that you are a connector. You're one of the people that connects other people with other people. And that's one of your missions in life, is one of your values. And what I see in that is it's a healing thing. You like to heal people and bring people together. And what those notes do is it seems to kind of tie you back to your mission. And it gives you the opportunity to exercise your mission of bringing that connection. And I love it because what it did for me, obviously. But the idea of compassion is profound. And so when you suggested it, the first thing I thought of is every time I say that word compassion, my geek brain breaks it down into the roots. And so I did some digging into it. And so it's calm, meaning with or together or togetherness. And then passion or it comes from the Latin passio, which means, suffering or experience. And so the word compassion is like being with someone else's suffering, being with someone's experience. As I got to that point, I'm like, wait a minute, didn't we just talk about sympathy and empathy? And sympathy is Greek in origin, but it's syn and pathos, both meaning with and suffering, or experience or feeling. And so the two words, when you kind of break them down into their elements, are the same thing. But they never, to me, feel like the same thing. Like there's connotations, there's difference, at least for me, in how they feel. And sympathy to me feels like it's a very passive thing. It allows me to express to somebody that I'm feeling for them. I'm feeling that for them. But compassion seems so much more active. It feels like it's something that I'm doing. And yeah, maybe the words may mean the same thing, but I think experientially, one's more action-oriented, and compassion's more action-oriented. When you think about it, is that something you think?
Yeah, I definitely see it as like an action word. So compassion to me means, yes, I feel it, but what am I actually going to do about it? What do I actually take and deal with? What's my next step from that? It's kind of like the beginning of the sentence, not the full sentence itself. And I love that on the personal side. I love that on like the self-application side of how do we have compassion for ourselves, but even as a business advantage. And this is something you and I have spoken about, keynote spoken about, like the human side of business, or the advantage of humanness in the workplace, and how do we leverage that. And it's interesting because there's 3 words that come to mind when I think of compassion, like in action, however we're actually enacting that, or what we're doing with those feelings of compassion. And I think space, grace, and pace. those are like the three starting points for somebody who wants to be more compassionate, wants to offer compassion, or needs to offer it to themselves, or even in a work environment. And so space, like what kind of, not necessarily physical space, although that might be a component of it, but what space are you creating or allowing yourself to operate in, your team to operate in? And it, what does that look like? And are you giving people enough space to come to their own conclusions? Are you giving yourself enough space to, like, why do I get up at 4:15 in the morning? I need a little space if I'm going to manage the pace and give anybody else some grace throughout the day. And then grace meaning, a little bit of room for error, and a little bit of freedom from judgment, and a little bit of, like, what, let me give you the benefit of the doubt. Let me presume positive intent instead. And giving that grace to other people as well as to yourself. And then pace. And pace is a really interesting thing because I think it plays a much bigger role in compassion than people realize. And in a couple of ways. Number one, having some compassion around what we are expecting of ourselves, and what we are expecting of others in terms of output and capacity. Like, how much can you really handle, produce, deal with, tackle in one day? What does that pace look like? And I was doing a call yesterday with a friend of mine, and she's working 3 jobs, and her teammates are furloughed and they have vacant positions, and it's a local government, and so it's not like they can just put services on hold.
Right.
And she said, I'm scheduled, I have 7 30-minute meetings scheduled all day today, back to back to back to back to back, no break. And so there's an element of pace that brings compassion, and when you can't control the pace 100%, where are those places where you can control it? And so I think space, grace, and pace for me is one of my fun starting points when I talk about compassion.
I love that, and I want to talk about just a couple of them, and I'll probably derail a couple of times. Let's just deal with that.
know.
No, but the idea of grace is the word calms me. Like, I love the word grace. But when I think about it, I imagine allowing someone to deal with something in the way that they're dealing with it. And you mentioned without judgment, or at least a temporary freedom from judgment. And that is one of the most difficult things for us to do, is to suspend judgment. And we say we do it a lot, but when what we don't realize is that when we judge something as a positive, that is still a judgment. And the impacts of that judgment implies that there is a negative. And in most psychology research, they find that all of these judgments, good, bad, right, wrong, though they're illusions, right? They're all built on our perceptions and our experiences, our past experiences, or biases. And when you allow someone to have their reaction the way that they're having it, suspending judgment freely, it fundamentally changes the way that you can be with their suffering. And so, and this is something that I've worked on really, really difficultly. It's been very difficult for me to work on my entire life, is that I'm a fixer. I want to fix things. And when someone comes to me with a problem, my way of being compassionate, or at least I thought I was, is to come in and fix the problem and identify what's the root cause, and let's dig at that and heal that, and then we can build back up, which has been great for a coaching business, right? It does us wonders in coaching. But the problem is, I'm not actually being compassionate. I'm judging this experience they're having as wrong. You should not be feeling this way, and therefore I need to fix something. But truly giving them the grace to experience what they're experiencing allows me to be with them in a way that is so much more valuable and so much more powerful.
Mm-hmm. So the way I kind of see that evolving is, the difference between fixing and experiencing with, which is like the word.
Yeah.
What does it mean? I'm here with you. One of the things that you and I've bumped into a couple of times working with teams over the last couple of weeks is leaders struggling to find the right way to help their team members.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions that we keep hearing, well, I keep telling them, if you need something, let me know. If you need something, let me know.
Yep.
And I think of that as like a really great first baby step into compassion and like improved service to team members, but it's not enough. And I like to reword that and work with them in terms of offering more specific ways, because I think people, when they're in a situation where they're uncomfortable or there is suffering, you know, and suffering is such a huge word. I don't mean like, you know, bleeding profusely from stab wound type of suffering. It could just be, I'm stressed out, I'm anxious, I have too much on my plate, I'm struggling with time management, whatever. But moving into, would it be helpful if, and then filling in that blank, because it's not the fixing, like, I think you should, but it's a really powerful way to serve other people who might not really know what they need. You know, I mean, I've been in that situation before where I was dealing with a grief process or a major transition, and I had any number of people offering, you know, let me know what you need. And I'm like, well, holy crap, what if I don't know what I need? You know,
Right.
then what? Then I'm totally screwed. You know, nobody can help me. So I think that's a powerful reframe on that approach of let me know what you need, let me know if you need me, into would it be helpful if, would it be helpful if, and then trying to fill in those blanks.
Yeah. And that really helps. It helps provide the space in a way, right? And so instead of kind of directing, this is something that I am so bad at, and forgive me for saying bad, which is a judgment. But
I'm not judging you for it.
Thank you. That's good. That's good that you're not judging me. Is that I tend to kind of steer conversations in the path that the way that I see it. And so, like, kind of, you know, what should I help you with? Kind of similar thought. If I have a couple of suggestions or opportunities to help someone in a specific way, can I help you with this? Would it be helpful if I did this? What it does is it's not necessarily directive, but it kind of opens up to the possibility that help is available. And that's a fundamental shift. You know, in going through the last couple of months, I've seen so many people express overwhelm, you know, that we talked about last week. We've seen so many people talk about being anxious and uncertain. And what I found is, you know, in controlled environments, when we're all talking about, you know, the resilience training that everyone's been asking us for, in those environments, it's very easy to type down a couple of words. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling depleted. You know, these words that people are sharing with us. But what we don't grant ourselves is that space and the grace to experience, like, what is manifest when I'm overwhelmed? Like, in my day-to-day, how do I behave when I'm feeling that overwhelm? And allowing people the grace and giving them the space to express that. What I've found is that, at least in my household, my little bubble, is that when my wife is feeling stressed, she gets an elevated intensity that is hard for me to keep up with. And I've started to pay attention. Her eyebrows go up, her pace accelerates, and she starts listing thing. And I'm like, am I supposed to be responding to these things? Am I supposed to be writing them down? Like, what am I supposed to do with all these things? And I've started to say, okay, I can't keep up. And what I realize is it's not that she's just a hyper stressed individual. That is one of the ways that her overwhelm manifests, and allowing her the grace to go through that in the way that she needs to has changed the way we've interacted. Because before, it was like we're butting up against each other. Like, well, you need to calm down. I don't actually say that to her.
Yeah,
I know
please
better.
Don't. But I know you're smarter than that.
but what I would do is I would try to correct this behavior that did not make sense to me, and allowing her the the space to experience it herself and the grace to go through it in her own way has changed the way we've interacted.
Yeah. Permission. That's the word that comes to mind. Doesn't have to be the same as like I condone it or I want to mimic it
Or I have some authority over it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Or yeah, it's not like, oh, here's the holy water, I sprinkle you with it. But permission, and it might even be permission for you not to step in and react. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about compassion, for me, permission is a piece of that, because a lot of times the most compassionate thing we can do is give permission to feel the thing that we need to feel. Right. Maybe not forever, maybe not for 7 days in a row, 24 hours a day, but for 5 minutes, can I just feel this? Can I feel disappointed? Can I give myself permission to feel anxious and then move into how do I fix it? Can I give permission for this? And when you come at it from that standpoint, I think there's some real magic there. And there certainly is on the personal side. But if you think about that applied in a work setting, of coming in and saying, what could I give permission for in the work environment versus what do I need to control for in the work environment? I think there's an opportunity for creative thinking there that may not be there. And if you think about that from the lens of the people you serve also, or that your client or you serve with, what would they, how would they benefit if somebody gave them permission for something? What could that look like? And I think it's a really different type of question to ask. And it just might loosen up some of our thinking. It might help us think a little bit differently. There's a principle of fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence of, children learn well and learn quickly and adapt because they have fluid intelligence. They're taking in inputs and then they change the way that they think. Heaven forbid, we evolve the way that we think about things. And by the age of 23, most of our intelligence is crystallized, which means there's no room for new information. And I'm going to ask you to talk about the illusion of certainty in a minute, because there's a tie-in here very much to compassion that I want to share with people. But crystallized intelligence is I already know how this is going to go. Like I don't need new input. Like I already know how to deal with the thing. And so asking a question like, what could we give ourselves permission to do or have, or how to be is a way to step back into some of that fluid thinking. And for yourself, if you are hurting, if you are struggling, if you are suffering, no matter what magnitude that looks like on whatever scale you're judging it by, which maybe you can step off of the judgment scale for a minute, what would be compassionate to yourself to give yourself permission for as well? And that is, holy cow, that's a fun assignment. Yeah. That's a really fun one to try and lean into.
Yeah, I think about what the world would look like if we spent more time in that space of what is there left to learn, what is there that I don't know, what do they know that I don't, or that I can be taught. And yeah, so talking about the illusion of certainty, there's this principle that our brains project certainty, even if there is none. And the interesting thing is, the more intelligent that we are, the more likely we are to believe that we know everything that we say, everything that we believe, we lock in as if it is the way the world actually is, which is where you run into situations like, we've been talking about racism a lot in our household. So I'm Black, if you hadn't noticed. My wife is white and Costa Rican, and so our children are this beautiful mix of cultures. And so our 11-year-old Jerem, he's had to endure some very awful things said to him, racist things, at his elementary school. It's like that should not be a part of our world. Yeah. And so we've decided to help educate the people in our sphere of influence and share those experiences. And a surprising number of people say to us, I didn't think racism was around anymore. And when I think about that, I think about the illusion of certainty is that the way that I see the world because I don't experience racism, is the way the world actually is. And what I hear from that is that there's huge opportunity for us to step outside of our own experience. There's this huge opportunity for us to acknowledge that what I know, what I see, isn't the entire picture. There is something more. I can step out of my experience and see what else is out there, because there is a whole world out there if we're open to looking for it. We spend so much time projecting that we know everything that we don't do it. And I want to come back to this because I know you want to say something about that, but the Dunning-Kruger effect is the idea that we assess our own knowledge as much higher and assess other people's knowledge as much lower when given same intelligence levels, same knowledge levels. And that leads to some really, really drastic experiences because people will just assume that they're an expert in something that they're not. And then assume that experts are not experts when they are. And that's really, really interesting.
So my tie-in to this is, or maybe a branch off of it or a jumping off point, tangent, if you will, is in the self-compassion space. That absolutely applies to, like, the brains, our brains like to project certainty even when there is none. And that amount of, I'm holding on to, I know this, I want to answer this. You and I had a shared experience about, like a year and a half ago now, when we were getting ready to go over to Ventura, California, which oddly enough, that's the mug that you're drinking your mystery beverage out of today. That's really funny. And it was like the night before we were supposed to leave. We're gonna meet at the airport the next morning. And I wanted to update the slides to the slide deck. There's a couple of changes I wanted to make on some of mine, whatever. And so for those of you who may not know, Eric and I work in the Google suite. And so we share files via Google Drive, and it's this really wonderful tool, and it's how we share all this. And we've mentioned it before. Eric is like Captain Tech Savvy, and Nicole is actually like her 95-year-old grandmother who's afraid of it all. So there's admittedly a bit of a lower starting point for me here. But I was updating the files and I went to save it to our Google Drive and I couldn't save it. Like I couldn't save the files. And I was like, well, this is ridiculous. I've done this before, like, let me deploy my only like tech solution ever. I will reboot my computer. And so I save it to the desktop, I reboot, still can't get it into the Google Drive folder. And now I'm getting agitated. And then I'm like, well, I'm just going to email it to him. Well, it emails it as a link from your files. And then I can't get it to actually attach because it won't, do the thing to the thing and can't get it. And so I'm getting like frustrated. And then you tried to help me. I think it was either you or Sean. I think it was you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, probably both of you guys, being very helpful, intentionally so. Just reset the router. And I'm like, I don't know what the freaking router looks like. And what it kicked off for me, and this is where the tangent's headed, so, end scene here, was I started asking in my own head, how could I be this stupid? Mm-hmm. How could I possibly run a business successfully and have people believe in me when I can't even attach a dang file to an email or save it in the drive like I've done 100 other times? And I don't even know what the router looks like. So, why would anybody even let me have a child in the first place and pass on these genes? And what happened was that illusion of certainty kicked in, and my brain had really great answers for all of this.
Every question.
How could I be this stupid? Well, you've always been this stupid, mm-hmm. because blah, 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 blah. And it brought up all these things, and I started spinning my wheels in this direction. And in the morning, I finally got frustrated enough and went to bed. And in the morning, I wake up to this text message from you with like a link to an article. Google's Gmail and Google Drive suffer global outages. And like literally the time at which I was trying to save the files, nobody in the world was able to save files at that point. And it wasn't me. But that illusion of certainty kicked in so strongly. Yep. And really amplified that negative self-talk. And when I think of compassion, it ties to the illusion of certainty, mm-hmm. so strongly for how we deal with other people, like what your stories and your examples, and how we deal with ourselves. And so from a strategy standpoint, watching out for when that's kicking in, I want to fix, or I'm assuming everybody else is doing this, or I'm answering, negative self questions. Is that, just step back and ask, is that the illusion of certainty? And if it is, then holy cow, step the hell out of it.
Right. Right.
Step the hell out of it and get that new perspective. So I love that as a principle that you've taught me.
Yeah, it is so pervasive. It's ubiquitous. You can't even know how often it takes hold of you. And that's something that I created the principle, and I've been teaching it all over the world. And I still get caught up in realizing, oh, there it is again. Oh, there it is again.
Yeah.
There's something so my wife and I, we're really working on our communication right now, Jamie and I, and we're just trying to be more, just like, if we think about something, just say it right away, even if it's uncomfortable. It's a fun little experiment to do on quarantine, by the way.
Do you when you can't get away from each other? When you can't get away from each other? Before you go into it, did you intentionally agree to that? Like, did you say, we're going to try this? Was there like a framework around that? Because I feel like if I launched that at Sean, he would be like, what are you, like, back off, woman?
So here's the interesting thing. I don't think that we decided that explicitly. But here's what's really fun. And so I've been doing these weekly book clubs with the book. And she's been on every single one of them because she has time. And so it's kind of funny. So Jamie's on it, my mom's on it, my mother-in-law's on it, along with 25 other people. And someone commented after the last one and said, I love these book clubs because it's an opportunity for all these powerful women to rag on Eric. So it's that's kind of where it came from, as we were going through some of these principles and the stories that come up from all the people in the book club. They start sharing them, and then Jamie comments about her experience with her husband, and obviously everyone knows that I'm her husband, and then I share some comments about me and my wife, and so that kind of spurred this really, really interesting dialogue between us, that we're going to try out some of, or I want to work on this, and so she started just calling me on it and say, because there's this thing that happens where she says something, and I'm going to be 100% vulnerable here because I'm still learning this about myself, and I will respond, but to a different question. So she'll ask me this, and I'll respond to that, and or she'll ask me for something, and I'll go off and get the thing that I heard her say, but I was listening to something different, and she says, it's her words. It seems to me that you're listening for what you think I'm going to say, yes, and then you respond to that, or you listen for what you think I'm going to say, and then you go and get that thing when that's not what I'm asking for. And so I'm going to give you my internal response to that, and then my journey that I'm on right now. And my internal response is, no, I just misheard you. Like there was some disconnect in what you said, or something. There was some misconnect, and I'm not just trying to steer what I want it to be. And that's my first reaction to it. But realizing that the illusion of certainty takes hold of us all the time, what I'm exploring now is maybe it's the illusion of certainty that has me not properly listening well when in these situations when she's talking. And what I told you, it's the journey I'm on. I'm struggling with this right now, because is it possible, and I know the answer is yes, is it possible that I'm lacking compassion for my wife in these moments? Am I lacking getting into her experience, into her understanding, and just jumping to what I expect it to be or what I think it should be? And that's a journey that I'm on right now. And I think that a lot of these relationships that we have in the world, with people that we're close to, people that we're not close to, there's a natural opportunity for us to not be compassionate. Especially if there's a fundamental difference in this illusion of certainty, or at least brought on by the illusion of certainty or reinforced by the illusion of certainty. People who think differently, disagree with us. There's this natural kind of disconnect from compassion. And I think that if we take that step into, does this gap exist because I'm not being compassionate, or because I'm not getting into or being with them actively, that can change everything.
Yeah. Because wouldn't it look different when, like you said, I know the answer is yes, right? I know the answer is yes. It's like even dealing with children. We were talking about this before we logged on, because my morning this morning of, my daughter's 2, just having what I'm hoping is not like, long-term negative societal impact.
Terrible twos.
But literally turned 2 last Saturday, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Of like some of the screaming and the, some of that sort of thing. And it's easy for me to react to that and want to curb it, and I don't want a child screaming at me for the next 16 years, like, also not an acceptable alternative. But when I step like one step further of like, could I be compassionate to this rather than trying to control it? Because my knee-jerk reaction is don't scream. Like, we don't scream in this house, and half the time I'm like, maybe I should do that without elevating my own voice while I'm saying it. But if I step into compassion, then I become curious.
Yes.
What's going on? And then I can turn it to, she's 2, so it's a bit of a different conversation. What can I help solve, either about my own behavior, the environment, what's going on for her, whatever, that can allow this to be different. And that place of curiosity, of wanting that, again, compassion means with, right? With, and that's the key. If we applied that at work, at home, in society as a whole, with that with as the foundation, I think that's the transformative piece. That's the transformational point in the conversation, because then the neighbor down the street that I'm in a disagreement with because of their opposite views of mine on, name a subject, if I start to approach that as how can I be with you, then we start to find those points of commonality. And that's the powerful place to jump off of. And so when we've been working with teams as they're struggling, and it's a performance issue, or it's a productivity issue, or a timing issue, or whatever number of issues that are going on, the second I see that leader or that employee or that group of employees make that bridge that gap, cross that bridge. How many metaphors am I mixing right there?
That's all right. That's all right.
Okay. Make the connection into we, or I'm with, then it becomes something that we together work on and solve. And so I love that, whether it's an intentional conversation about it, or like an intentional practice like you and Jamie are playing with and exploring, or just something that sort of happens and you all of a sudden make that connection, that synapse starts to fire. There's real transformation there.
Yeah, I think a good practice for that is what you teach all the time as far as mastering the story. And we don't want to dive too much. Maybe we bring this for the next conversation.
Yeah.
But the idea of the illusion of certainty makes us believe that the story we're telling is not just a story; it's a fact.
Yes.
And one thing that we're seeing a lot right now is this separation between my experience and your experience. And my lockdown is so much harder than your lockdown. And you can't know what my lockdown is. And what we're doing is we're telling a story that we're separate. We're telling a story that you don't understand me. We're telling it's a story. And then the illusion of certainty makes us believe that that's fact. And if you do that step, that we step, what you can do is you can try to understand their story in a way that brings us back together. And so instead of saying, I'm suffering more than you, because we're all suffering with something. There's no human without suffering here. But what you can do is you can try to, again, be with them and their suffering, be compassionate with them. And that's what's necessary. A lot of times, and this is something my experience, is that I always want to pull and say, I need you to understand me. I need you to understand me.
Yeah.
Because what I'm going through is the real thing. You don't understand. You need to understand me. And so if I let go of that story and say, okay, how can I understand you? How can I be with you and your experience? That is the first step towards rebuilding or improving relationships. And I love the way you said, if we can make it about a we, that is an active step that we can take to improve all of this.
Yep. So I want to kind of wrap this on a personal note, of sort of back into the self-compassion space of how to bridge that gap when it's happening within yourself. I run into this problem a lot, of being very hard on myself. And I coach a lot of people that are very hard on themselves, and a lot of high performers, a lot of women in particular, but this really knows no gender, of that difficulty. And it's almost like there's a split there. And apply that same principle with yourself.
Yeah.
How do I make it we? Because if that voice in our head, or little gremlins on our shoulders, are negative or self-critical, or you're stupid, how come you don't know what a router looks like and you're almost 40? Which I should, I'll learn that at some point.
You don't not important.
But one of the ways to step out of that and kind of bridge that gap for yourself and find that within that critical voice in yourself is to put yourself into the position of, if I were coaching or mentoring me, how would I approach it? What would I be telling myself? What permissions would I give that person? And so again, kind of stepping into that role where you look at it from a different party standpoint is really powerful, because if our goal is to serve, our goal is to be present for our families, good human beings, successful, whatever, there's only one place that starts, and that starts with ourselves.
Right.
And so applying that compassion inwardly too has been really helpful for me. And that was one powerful strategy that I just want to make sure I kind of leave people with, if that's something you're struggling with, or if it's something that someone around you is struggling with, and you hear that in their self-talk, to clue into that, and then two, to offer them that as a framework. What would you tell yourself if you were coaching yourself? Not like step out of that dialogue and really put yourself in the place of, if you were asking yourself for help, what would you want to hear? Right. And I think that's a very healing place to be personally.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
Thanks.
I'm
almost out of coffee, Eric.
So I promised someone that I would start the tradition of a dad joke a week. So I have a dad joke that I want to share as we wrap it. What do you call a hen that spends all of her time counting her eggs?
I don't know.
A mathemachicken.
Oh, that's horrible. Oh my gosh. With that.
Keep connecting.
That's terrible, dude.
That's
was
the
really
best.
bad.
That is you just watched. That's the best one. People are going to tune in next week to hear what the next dad joke is. That was so awesome.
I don't think it's better from here. Are you trying to set like a low bar and then you'll get better every week? Is that the strategy?
Oh, that was a good one.